I never expected that the simple act of painting my front door would turn into a neighborhood battle that would blow open a decade of corruption, expose a dozen lies, and ultimately bankrupt the very HOA board that tried to intimidate me. But that's exactly what happened, and to this day, people still joke that my forest green door was the single most dangerous object our community ever faced. It all began on a quiet Tuesday morning when I found a neon orange violation notice slapped onto my door, accusing me of using an unapproved color. At first, I actually laughed because I remembered clearly choosing forest green from the HOA's own approved list, a list I had printed, highlighted, and taped to my fridge during the renovation. But the tone of the letter wasn't casual at all. It was written like I had committed a felony. They demanded I repaint the door within 10 days or face escalating fines. So, thinking it was a harmless mistake, I emailed them politely. Instead of an apology, I got a robotic message from the board president claiming the finish was wrong. When I provided the paint can label proving it was matte, suddenly they shifted again. The undertone was too warm. Then it became the sunlight reflection effect. Then my personal favorite, the neighborhood harmony clause, a vague, poetic paragraph they loved to weaponize against people they didn't like. For years, I'd watched them harass elderly residents, threaten single parents, and nitpick hard-working families who just wanted to live in peace. I had attended meetings where board members acted like tyrants in polo shirts, but I never thought they'd try it with me. The moment they fined me $250 plus $50 per day, I realized this wasn't about a door. It was about control. It was about punishment. It was about teaching me a lesson because I had opposed their silly HOA landscaping budget at the last meeting. That night, instead of sleeping, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 cups of coffee and the entire 200-page HOA rulebook spread out in front of me. I read it like it was a thriller novel. I studied every amendment, every footnote, every boring piece of tiny text they hoped nobody would ever question. And then I found it. Hidden deep in the enforcement section, tucked between maintenance guidelines and voting procedures, was a single sentence that changed everything. Any rule resulting in financial penalty must be supported by a publicly accessible, board-approved written standard. I read it 5 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It meant that if they couldn't produce written, board-approved standards defining gloss level, reflection index, or undertone requirements, they legally could not fine me. Not only that, they were obligated to reimburse any homeowner for all money spent defending themselves. I grinned. They had no idea what storm was coming. Over the next week, I organized everything like a lawyer preparing for trial. I printed every page of the rulebook, tabbed it, color-coded by topic, highlighted the deadly clause in neon yellow, and compiled a binder thick enough to be considered a weapon. I kept every email, every letter, every timestamp. I even documented how many hours I spent researching, because the bylaws said they had to reimburse reasonable efforts. When I requested a hearing, the board assumed I'd cave like everyone else. They sat around their table smugly, with the board president giving me that condescending smile he always saved for people he believed were beneath him. They started with the usual scripted speeches about community cohesion and visual standards. They waved vague words around like weapons, trying to intimidate me. I sat quietly until they were done. Then I asked a single question. Can you provide the board-approved written standard for the undertone requirement you claim I violated? The silence in the room was almost comical. They shuffled papers, they whispered, someone pretended to look through a binder. They had nothing, and that's when I placed my own binder on the table with a satisfying thud and read their bylaw aloud. The board attorney's face went pale. The treasurer's jaw clenched. The vice president nervously tapped a pen. They all knew they were caught. Not only did they have to revoke my fines, they had to reimburse the cost of every certified letter, every attorney consultation, and every documented hour of research. I handed them the invoice, $8,964.12. The president tried to negotiate, saying the amount was unreasonable. I simply opened the rulebook again and pointed at the reimbursement clause. He didn't say another word. They were legally required to pay within 30 days, or the HOA would trigger a mandatory state audit. They paid. Barely. Their reserve funds took a massive hit. But the story didn't end there. Oh no, this was just the opening act. Word spread around the neighborhood like wildfire. People who had been fined for inconsistent mailbox shine, winter grass overgrowth, and improperly festive holiday decorations started coming to me, asking if they could challenge their fines too. I showed them the loophole. I helped them file paperwork. Within weeks, refund requests began pouring in. People who had been bullied for years were finally pushing back. The HOA board tried to fight it, but the law was the law. Refund after refund drained their accounts. When they attempted to raise dues to save themselves, the community voted it down. When they blamed unexpected financial strain, everyone laughed. Finally, state regulators stepped in. The audit uncovered everything: missing funds, unauthorized expenses, fake violations issued for profit, votes that were never recorded properly, and shady backroom decisions. By the end of the investigation, the entire board was forced to resign. The state appointed a receiver to take over and rewrite the bylaws from scratch. The HOA wasn't just humbled, they were financially crippled, exposed, and dismantled from the inside out. All because they picked a fight with the wrong person over the wrong forest green door. Today, whenever I walk past that same door, I run my hand over it like it's a trophy. My neighbors call it the door that ended the dictatorship. And every time I look at it, I'm reminded of one truth. Sometimes justice doesn't come from shouting, fighting, or breaking laws. It comes from reading the fine print your enemy thought you'd never take seriously.